let's talk about what needs to happen. What's wrong with the way regulation is structured today when we think about this transition, right? The move to net zero. What do you see as the main regulatory obstacles that are standing in the way of change?
Well, there's a couple, but I think the two of the most important ones are A, we can't build enough, fast enough. So everything that has to do with permitting and with construction rules is a big issue. And the second one is the, let's say, lack of economic prioritization in how regulation is structured. For instance, how whole subsidy regimes are structured. And then there's two more. One is the mixture of various types of regulation. So social policy gets mixed up with energy policy, for instance. And another one is the fact that market-based regulations seem to be discredited up to a certain degree, and I think that's a big problem.
So let's unpack this a little bit. We've talked a little bit already today about permitting and how challenging it is. Do you have any bright ideas on what could bust the logjam on this? Do you have any proposals? Or there are different ideas in Brussels and different parts of the world how to get towards an arrangement for, let's say, projects that are cleared or as priority projects, if they're climate related, to have zones in which you have given automatic approval or a fast track approval and so on. Do you see any of these actually working out?
I think actually it will require a mixture of many different approaches, I mean, we are active in over 30 countries, so we see in practically every country we see some things which really work well and things which horribly go wrong, typically.
Give us one example of something that's working well, because we need some hope here, because it seems pretty challenging.
So, for instance, the French, when it comes to appeals, have basically just cut one layer of possible appeals. A layer which nobody took seriously, because everybody would go anyway to the next layer of appeal possible. So they just scrapped that, and it just accelerated things actually.
I see.
Very simple.
So there's some common sense things that can be done.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And to give you an opposite example, so in Switzerland, for instance, everything is being atomized actually to a communal level. So on a communal level, people can say yes or no to certain wind park or whatever infrastructure, which means that nothing gets built because, you know, we have the NIMBY banana cave problem basically everywhere in Europe.
What's the cave problem?
Citizens against virtually everything.
Oh, I like that. That's good. We'll have to take note of that one. Yeah.
My level of desperation is clearly has went through the NIMBY stage, the banana stage, and now we're at the cave.
We're all hiding in the cave, exactly. Okay, excellent. I learned something today. You also talked about sort of a move away from market-based approaches.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you want? I mean, what you mean by this? In fact, when I look at Europe pioneered emissions trading, not the United States when it comes to climate change. Europe is talking about CBAM, which it would be according to the WTO, it's consistent with the trade principles if it's done properly. These sound like market-based approaches. What's wrong with the approach here?
Well, that's not wrong. I mean, obviously, the best way to sort it all out would be a global carbon tax, right?
Hallelujah.
Fully refunded.
Sing it,
yes,
brother.
I know,
yes.
I know. But you know, it's not a unicorn in the sense that, as far as I know, unicorns do not really exist. Whereas a
so
carbon
maybe it
tax,
is a unicorn.
Yeah,
it doesn't exist either.
Okay, but at least theoretically, it's very much conceivable. A unicorn, I think, would be a bit more of a challenge. Anyway, so that's actually good. I mean, the emission trading scheme should be rolled out and accelerated further to encompass all the sectors actually, and have more teeth, frankly. And then we could actually get rid of lots of subsidy schemes. But there's some opposition towards market-based proposals, maybe because, you know, in some quarters they are discredited by fundamentally, and in others they are not implemented properly. So let me give you an example, again, maybe from Switzerland. If you build a rooftop PV in Switzerland as a house owner, for instance, you get in total about 60% of the initial cost is being subsidized away through various channels, which do not prioritize the fact that we do not need more summer power, we need winter power. And rooftop PV generates a quarter of the energy in winter and 3/4 in summer. Whereas you've got alpine PV plants, large-scale alpine PV plants, which at best get another also 60% subsidy, but they produce against the market price. So it's much more challenging to make that work.
So we need smarter subsidies, as it were, ones that are more connected with the actual benefits provided to the energy system.
Exactly, exactly. So prioritize which goal you want to sort out, and then prioritize regulatory schemes, including subsidy schemes, according to the specific goal that you want to achieve. For instance, get more electricity in winter.
Which works better, do you think, from your analysis at your firm, carrots or sticks, when we think about trying to move the energy transition forward?
We need both, honestly. So one thing that we are fighting with constantly is that let's say, if you want to make an energy transition of a given country, and anyway, there's huge difference between the countries, not just from a cultural point of view, but also from let's say, what makes sense from a geographic point of view. So structuring, let's say, a target picture, assuming that you do want to decarbonize, of course, and you do want to get more electricity, you better do that in optimizing the overall country. So where do you place PV, where do you place wind, where do you place other forms, hydro, geothermal, whatever. If you start to do that on a communal level, inevitably you'll get to a very, very inefficient overall structure. So you need the sticks part, in the sense that we need to look at it from a bigger perspective, optimize it, and then, quite frankly, up to a certain degree, everybody has to make some compromises, and the compromises might be that, no, this is the area where we'll actually construct wind parks, irrespective of the reindeers.
Now, you work across several dozen countries, you told me. In the US, the climate legislation known as the IRA and the infrastructure law, these are the biggest climate legislation seen in US history, but they're almost entirely composed of subsidies and tax breaks. They're almost all carrots. There's virtually no stick, as it were. What should we think about that? How should we analyze that?
Well, I mean, again, it's highly culture specific, I think. I mean,
well, every culture likes free money. I mean, who in this room doesn't like free money? Hands up. You see, they all want subsidies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to comment on specific US policies, but what I actually read is that, for instance, in Texas, wind is working very well now, because the farmers actually realize that they'll earn much, much more with wind than with cattle ranching, for instance, even before the subsidies.
It's the number one state in America for wind, even though it's very deep red Republican.
Just don't call it renewable.
Exactly.
I think that
economist reader. Excellent. That's right. They don't want to be called environmentalists.
Yeah, no.
Money makers with windmills.
Yeah. Whatever.
We'll take it.
Patriot wind or something.
Exactly. Patriot wind. You're good at this. And there's one other area. You talked about sort of a proliferation of regulatory approaches. What's wrong with having 1,000 flowers bloom? Should every country, you just said culture varies. Why not have different regulatory regimes in every country in Europe? That sounds like a good thing. Yeah,
up to a certain degree, I like the idea of a competition of ideas and different approaches. That's good.
Yeah.
When it comes to, let's say, emission trading, of course, if you start to go down that road, then it just becomes a mess and economically very inefficient. And again, I mean, you do need to take into specific cultural differences when you make specific regulations. However, again, I mean, the European energy system, you have to look at it as one system. And I mean, it's obvious that it makes a lot of sense if you look at the decarbonization from a European point of view, including the grids.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start to think of it as one highly interconnected system, there are some limits to how much you can actually have these local regulations. So, for instance, we have our gas trading hub is in Sofia, in Bulgaria, and they manage the gas trading for 25 countries. And it's 25 times X different systems, interfaces. So I asked the traders, how many tools do you have to work with in order to make this work? Answer, 200. I mean, obviously, this leads to a suboptimal results from a economic point of view, from a society, okay? Right. Not even our own P&L. So
we need to...
It's a balance. We need a balanced approach, I think.
I'd mentioned it in passing, but I'm curious if you can weigh in on this. What do you think of the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism? Now, this is something that Europe is proceeding with. It was very controversial, but as the train is leaving the station, now we're hearing American senators, both Democrats and Republicans, are willing to do something like a CBAM for America. Is this a good idea, or what do you see as the pros and cons of this idea?
Well, fundamentally, it's a market-based mechanism, if it's not being messed up on an operation level, of course. But fundamentally, it's a market-based mechanism, so I would say it's a good idea. Secondly, in the absence...
Is it just a protectionist ruse to keep out Chinese stuff?
Yeah, well, what do you want to prioritize? I mean, do you want to prioritize a carbon pricing now, a decent one, or something else? So I would advocate that up to a certain degree, I mean, we do have to get in the direction of the unicorn carbon tax thing, and because that is politically so difficult, this is the next best alternative. If you don't do it, then apparently you generate a lot of trade imbalances, which are also not going to help. So I'd rather take the CBAM than not do anything and then see the actually unintended consequences of just, economic damage across Europe, and then the whole decarbonization idea gets discredited. That would be a far worse outcome than having to live with something which, again, a unicorn would be a better solution for.
Right. Now, I mean, one of the things that the CBAM is meant to stop, or at least to challenge, is imports of goods that are made in a carbon-intensive way overseas, not facing a carbon tax, but also certain kinds of carbon dumping, right? The export of heavy manufacture overseas, let's say. We heard from Greg Jackson, one of our previous speakers, that in future we may see certain kinds of energy-intensive activities move to where the cheap energy is. Some people suggest that we might see that with hydrogen as well, that where in Saudi Arabia, where there's a NEOM project, or Chile or Australia, we might see steelmaking or certain parts of the value chain go to where the cheap electricity or renewables or hydrogen are found. How does that fit in with your view of how a sensible regulatory reform would deal with this? Because we seem to have competing priorities, right? On the one hand, of course, Europe is very committed to decarbonization. On the other hand, particularly countries like Germany are very committed to avoiding deindustrialization, right? They want to keep their engineering jobs, their high-quality manufacturing jobs. They may be in tension. How do you see that working out? Both involve policy.
Well, as long as you do have some sort of mechanism in place that makes unhelpful arbitrage difficult, like a CBAM, then I think actually it also presents an opportunity. Now, if I read the analysis, not least in your publication, about just how much there is actually about the deindustrialization topic, then I wonder if it's as big a topic. Now, of course, for individual companies, it can be really, it can be a huge problem. So one customer of ours basically produces steel abrasive material in Europe. I mean, highly energy intensive, and it's a problem for them, obviously. But again, I mean, something's got to give. You have to, in the end, take some decisions about priorities, how you want to manage the energy trilemma. What shouldn't happen is just that we actually make the situations worse by then outsourcing energy industries to countries where actually the net impact on all carbon on a global scale is much worse than what it was before when it was done in Europe. That would be a Pyrrhic victory, I think you call it.
Right, indeed.
So,
we have just a moment left. Any final word to our audience as they think about, in the course of this day, and perhaps even the next couple of days, the energy transition, about how to think about the role of regulation?
I can only repeat myself. I think the principle of let's say much more market-based regulatory approaches is an important topic, and I think there's a special role because regulators typically also work based on what political priorities are set, and we need to be much more vocal and much more clear and much more transparent about what sort of political goals need to be reached. So, for instance, yes, we do need to make a decarbonization quicker and actually more, let's say, meaningful. That means we have to convince actually in a much better way populations about unpopular topics, such as where do we put the windmills? They have to go somewhere, okay? And there is a price to be paid, but we have to convince actually the public about the necessity so that they then vote for those politicians who make the sensible regulatory frameworks.
Maybe we should give some of Greg Jackson's free energy homes to the people that accept the windmills, show real benefits. That might help win them over. Get them out of their cave, right? We're just out of time. Please give my speaker a round of applause for making regulation interesting.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
Please.